The present passage, the one that we're going to discuss now, is another difficult passage. Many students would have found a lot of words here, or would find a lot of words here which are a little difficult to understand. Even the context, if you don't know, you would say, maybe I cannot do this passage. Move on to the next one, maybe. All right. But again, when you find a difficult passage, it's okay to do it at the end, right? The last of the four, let me attempt it. But you must remember that if you read it from the main part of view, you can at least answer 3 out of 4 questions instead of saying, I'm going to do it later. Later, you will never find the time. My approach always is, if you find a passage difficult, read it quickly once, because anyway, you have to go back to the passage to refer to the questions. Read it quickly but thoroughly. Don't skip anything. Once you do that, 2 answers, I remember reading it somewhere and read it. If there's an inference question, leave it. So at least you attempt 2 out of 4 questions and move on to the next one. Attempt it quickly and move on to the next one. That would be a better idea. So what was this passage about? It was about the Holocaust, about 4 a selection of autobiographical writings by Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. All right. The writers that the passage has chosen are 6 writers who had been taken from different backgrounds, different countries of Europe, and they had all spent time together in a concentration camp in Auschwitz in Poland. And their experiences he is quoting. The first one that he does is he mentions Otto Dov Kulka, who writes about skits, plays that were performed during his time in Auschwitz, and of the special and dark humor he had developed there. Obviously, a person who doesn't know, who knows he is doomed, he is going to die sooner or later, going to be sent to the gas chambers. Obviously, they would develop dark humor if they develop any humor at all. So this guy said that that he remembers skits, and he also remembers the dark humor he developed. Then it gives a description of Kulka. He was a child in Czechoslovakia when he was sent to Auschwitz, and he wrote a book, The Landscapes of the Metropolis of Death, 2013, where he mentions his fellow inmates in that camp, and one of them was Herbert. Herbert had given him and had introduced him to culture, to Crime and Punishment, the book, to Shakespeare, to all kinds of the culture, European humanism, which he calls European culture, European humanism. And then he recalls this another person called Freddie Hirsch, who devoted himself and his team of instructors to teach children in the concentration camps. History lessons, all that, artistic performances, plays, concerts, and even operas. So he says Hirsch's barracks became the center of spiritual and cultural life. And Kulka says that these experiences were significant in shaping his life, in the way he turned out later in life. Then he says that there was a limit to what culture and artistic escapism could do, because he says that all these history lessons, all these performances were happening within 100 to 200 meters of the place where people were selected. Every day, every few days, people were selected to be sent to the gas chambers, and they were again 100 or 150 meters away from the crematoria, places where the bodies were disposed of. So obviously, in the midst of this atmosphere of death and killing, these people have somehow managed a little bit of culture and a little bit of teaching. Similarly, he says that he is basically, reflecting on the art and culture that happened in these concentration camps, and he's reflecting on what they actually did, how he felt. He says, any pursuit of art in the camp, Frankel, there's another writer who says that any pursuit of art in the camp can be seen as grotesque. Grotesque means ugly, twisted, right? He says because it was set against the backdrop of a desolate camp, and he says it was a bizarre artistic experience. Strange. You're looking at art when somebody is dying. Then Frankel mentions one person called Imre. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right. I looked up two pronunciation sites, and one called it Imre and one called it Imra. So I said, it's the same thing. All right. He says this Imre was mentioned by Kulka. He says he chose Brotherhood of Man to teach the children a song. He was teaching the children a song, and the song he selected was strange because it was Brotherhood of Man based on Mozart Ninth Symphony. And he said Brotherhood of Man in a time where hardly that is happening. So many found that very absurd, the selection, the choice of the song. And the author of the autobiography, that is Kulka, asks, was he expressing his undying commitment to this value, that is the brotherhood of man, or was it an act of sarcasm? All right. And then after that, there's another book that he mentions where he talks of somebody who tries to escape. He calls it a doomed attempt. She tries to escape, and she says they were hiding in a barn, and when they were allowed out, she says the joy they found in playing like children, she'll never forget. All right. Now, he has also mentioned other things about the writers in the concentration camp. There were 6 writers about whose selection of autobiographical writings the original piece has given. And he said that out of those 6, 3 only survived. Their writings survived for us to read. All right. Which of the following statements is Autodov Kulka likely to support? Herbert and Hirsch's teachings developed his life vision. He did say they shaped, these experiences were important in shaping my life and the way I turned out. Therefore, 1 is correct. We don't have to look at B, C, and D, but let's quickly look at it. Herbert and Hirsch's teachings made Kulka forget temporarily about his precarious existence in a concentration camp. He did call it escapism, but he hasn't mentioned about himself personally whether he found their teachings to help him cope with the uncertainty. So this is not been mentioned in the passage. Therefore, we cannot really assume this. Kulka thought Imre's song, The Brotherhood of Man, to be extremely poignant considering the circumstances they were in. He didn't consider it poignant. He said, why did he choose this song? It was either his commitment to Brotherhood of Man, or it was a form of sarcasm, extreme sarcasm. So he did not find it poignant, means nostalgia, something that is sad, brings out sadness in you. He didn't find that. The cultural and artistic shows took place in an appropriate setting. In the passage, at least 2 places have called it terrible and bizarre. Art in this place was considered terrible, was considered bizarre, but they continued to do it, right? And so not appropriate, because they were taking place 100 or 200 meters away from a selection place where people were selected to be killed. And they were 200 meters away from the place where people were, from the crematorium. Therefore, the answer is A.